now think of you. Send me speak to me, and I'll speak to you. Never fit for me, and I'm fit for you. Born at the right time. Fit for me, and I'm fit for you. Born at the right time. Alone, are you waiting? Cold as the night. Alone, empty spaces. Born at the right time.
Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Kuwait.
Across Europe this wall will fall, for it cannot withstand faith, it cannot withstand truth.
And I want to say something to the school children of America who were watching the live coverage of the shuttle's takeoff.
I have never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body.
So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike that the torch has been passed.
The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
First in the plane. It's fighting and it's breaking. It's breaking terrible.
This is a portrait of an 85-year-old man. A man of great experience and a wealth of knowledge. A man who earned an honorable place in Arkansas history well before the paint on this canvas dried. This is a portrait of an 85-year-old man. This is William Edward Woodruff, as the year 1880 saw him. 85 years earlier, on Christmas Eve, 1795, Hannah Clark Woodruff gave birth to her first son on a small farm in Long Island, New York. Young William would know his father, Nathaniel, only 12 years before pneumonia left the family without its patriarch.
We can imagine young Woodruff inheriting the farm and becoming a potato farmer, except, of course, that the death of his father made farming impractical for the family. And so the result was that his mother apprenticed him to a printer. Now, apprenticeship, which goes back to the Middle Ages, was a complex legal document. She signed him over to Alden Spooner, editor and proprietor of a couple of Long Island newspapers, and Spooner had to provide a complete education, food, and clothing, and if he successfully completed the skills necessary, he would then receive a certificate that he was a journeyman printer. And this, of course, is what Woodruff did, and it marked his career for his entire life. The indenture comes to an end legally the minute he becomes 21. Then he has his certificate, and this is a diploma. This is open doors anywhere where printers were needed, and printers were needed all over the country. Then he decided that he would join the migration to the West, and his westward trip first landed him in Louisville.
Louisville would be home for Woodruff for only a short time, and on September 14, 1818, he began a long 140-mile walk from Louisville, Kentucky to Nashville, Tennessee.
The story came that they needed people in Nashville. The Clarion, which was also merged with the Tennessee State Gazette, by all evidence, an excellent, well-organized newspaper for that period of time. There was certainly nothing shoddy or slapdash. This meets all the national standards for quality. And what Woodruff found when he arrived in Nashville was that the beautiful layout, the well-designed newspaper, was actually a front for an essentially bankrupt operation that depended on the whim of the politicians.
While Woodruff did well at the Clarion, obtaining the rank of foreman, the paper, which seemed to be doing well in spite of hard economic times, was actually suffering quietly with a heavy debt. It soon became apparent to Woodruff that his future lay elsewhere.
Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled.
Second day of March, 1819, Congress approved the act which made Arkansas a territory. Thomas Bradford, the owner of the Clarion, enlightened Woodruff to the potential a territory without a newspaper contained for an industrious young printer. That printer could take for granted the governmental appointment of public printer and thus ensure the newspaper's survival until advertising revenues and circulation grew to a sustainable.
Shall, for the purposes of a territorial government, constitute a separate territory and be called the Arkansas Territory.
Woodruff bought a used printing press on credit, and in mid-September 1819, he loaded it, a trunk full of personal effects and other necessary items, onto a keelboat for the long journey west. On Halloween, he arrived at his destination. 20 days later, the Arkansas Gazette was born.
After a series of delays in transporting our materials to this place and in arranging our office since our arrival, we have at length succeeded in issuing the first number of the Gazette. The present size and complexion of our paper does not exactly suit us, but this we intend to remedy as soon as our patronage will justify our procuring new materials and enlarging its size. Arkansas Gazette editorial, Saturday, November 20th, 1819.
The most important notable element for the first issue of the Arkansas Gazette is that he spells Arkansas A-R-K-A-N-S-A-S. And about a third of the spellings of that time used a W at the end, which was, of course, how Arkansas was pronounced, but not how it would be historically spelled. And establishing that as the first newspaper in the territory and as the leading newspaper of the state cemented that spelling in law, both state and national.
Woodruff's print shop at Arkansas Post would have a relatively short life, as the territorial government would soon move to Little Rock. And in 1827, Woodruff and the Gazette would become involved in a political controversy.
Now, The key character in all of this is Robert Crittenden. He's from a famous Kentucky family. He's part of that high-toned Southern aristocracy. And we have descriptions of him as a gambler, corrupter of youth, and as a high-powered political operative. And he cemented in his office, which was Secretary of State, virtually the entire business of state government. And Governor Miller, the first governor, was notable for being gone most of the time. And so Crittenden profited greatly from his place in the center of power. And in fact, by the time Governor Miller resigned, Crittenden was the virtual czar of Arkansas.
As the election of 1827 neared, two factions in Arkansas Territory politics became evident. Robert Crittenden was the undisputed leader of one of the factions. The other faction's leadership was split among Chester Ashley, Henry Conway, William Woodruff, Governor Izard, and Ambrose Sevier.
The voters of Arkansas got to choose a territorial representative who traveled to Washington, had the freedom of the floor of the House and Senate, but could not vote. This person would be our lobbyist in the nation's capital. And that man was Henry Wharton Conway. Well, Crittenden felt that Conway had not protected him sufficiently. And Crittenden knew that Conway had borrowed, and with quotation marks around it, $600 of federal money for his own expenses. And accordingly, Crittenden apparently decided to use this to discredit Conway in Arkansas. Conway's friends, and that included the owner of the Arkansas Gazette, William Edward Woodruff, organized a campaign to defend their friend.
On June 5th of 1827, the first of several letters signed with the pseudonym "A Voter of Pulaski County" was published in the Gazette. This letter was mildly worded, but subsequent letters became violently abusive toward the Crittenden side.
A series of letters signed "A Voter of Pulaski County" began, each one getting nastier than the one before, and Crittenden got increasingly enraged. Crittenden came down to the printing office demanding the name of the letter right then on the spot, or threatening dire retribution. Woodruff replied he'd have to confer with the person in question, and 2 days later, he himself wrote to Crittenden carrying over the charges.
Sir, I have communicated since my note to you of last evening with the author of A Voter of Pulaski County. He requests me to say that considerations of a peculiar character render it highly improper for him to avow himself as the writer of that publication, and desires that I will not divulge his name. I conceive it to be the duty of all editors, in cases like the present, where they decline giving up the names of authors of communications, to assume the responsibility of such publications themselves. You will therefore consider me, though not the author, responsible for the charges alleged against you in the publication which appeared in my yesterday's paper, and I now announce to you that I am prepared to sustain those charges if you think proper to require me to do so in a legal manner. William E. Woodruff, June 15, 1827.
Woodruff's public letter to Crittenden, printed in the Gazette, only made things much worse. And Crittenden immediately responded by filing an enormous libel suit against Woodruff, as well as threatening physical violence, ear cropping and horsewhipping against Woodruff and all of his employees as well.
The election was held on August 6th, and the returns were released on the 14th. Crittenden's candidate, Robert C. Oden, lost with only 856 votes to Henry Conway's 2,427.
When the votes were counted, Conway was reelected to the office of territorial representative. But meanwhile, more nasty exchanges took place, including Conway in a public letter using the word liar on Crittenden. As a man of honor, as a Southern gentleman, Crittenden had no other option and challenged Conway to a duel.
On the east side of the Mississippi River, nearly opposite the mouth of the White River, Crittenden and Conway met. Conway was wounded on the first fire. 11 days later, Arkansas's territorial delegate was dead.
One of the interesting things about the 1828 election is that the newspaper itself, its very existence, was a political issue. And because of the controversy that came about through the publication of the letters and Crittenden's response to that, and the fatal duel between Conway and Crittenden, Crittenden decided that he'd better have a newspaper too. And so the result was the birth of the Arkansas Advocate. And we had a succession of newspapers then that would be competition for the Gazette in not merely the Little Rock market, but the whole state as well.
Over the next several decades, the Gazette was sold several times, and no less than 8 men called themselves the editor of the Arkansas Gazette. At the end of the century, the Gazette, or the Lady as some, witnessed a territory become a state. She was both handled well and mishandled. She went quiet as our Union disintegrated and urged healing in the new peace. Her biggest challenges and her proudest moments lay before her, and she would meet those for nearly 3/4 of the new century with the same man as editor, a 28-year-old reporter working as a bureau chief of a newspaper. On July 1st, 1902, John Netherland High School assumed the duties as editor-in-chief of the Arkansas Gazette. J.N. High School was the grandson of Frederick High School, who founded the Knoxville Register in 1816.
John Netherland High School grew up in Tennessee. By age 10, he had his own family newspaper. 3 years he was out of college and working in the press, covering sports, which he much disliked. He became a noted correspondent for the Associated Press, and then the family learned that the Arkansas Gazette in Little Rock was for sale.
The High School brothers reinvigorated the old lady at a time when she was considered the second best newspaper in Arkansas.
A Democratic newspaper. That is what the Arkansas Gazette will be under the new editorial management that begins today. The Gazette will strive to be a newspaper. News is the mental food of the human race. It exhilarates the mind as wine, and sustains, strengthens, and builds as bread. By paraphrase, it is twice advantageous. It advantages him that gives and him that takes, or him that tells and him that hears. It takes every man around the world once every 24 hours, and more marvelous still, allows him to stop and inform himself on the subject he happens to be interested in. When the humblest and poorest man unfolds a real newspaper, he opens a window through which he may look out upon the universe. This newspaper has outlived many lives. It begins a new one this morning. Arkansas Gazette editorial, July 1st, 1902.
The first thing the high school saw was that the plant had to be completely modernized. Not only did the plant have to be modernized, but the newspaper itself did not reflect the best standards of national journalism. Slowly but surely, they achieved all of these changes.
By 1906, the lady was looking as good as ever. She boasted a new press and went to a 7-day schedule.
The High School brothers poured every cent back into the newspaper in order to increase its profitability and viability. And this was a twofold operation, because Fred was the one who was responsible for the news. He did the newsroom work, and it was J.N., the nominal editor, who paid attention to the broad picture, the finances, and the technological improvements that were needed. This made the team of the High School brothers a real contribution to Arkansas journalism, and Fred's death in 1931 had profound implications for the future of the newspaper.
The High School brothers also commissioned to build the old lady a new home. George Mann, J.N. High School's father-in-law and designer of the state capitol, designed the new 3-story Beaux Arts building at the corner of 3rd and Louisiana.
All the work that high school spent on improving the paper became very evident in the 1930s. The new reporters were typically college graduates, often from the University of Arkansas, where W.J. Lemke was one of the leaders in journalism education in Arkansas.
With World War II looming in the not-too-distant future for America, the war industries were gearing up, and the newspapers made the most of their opportunity. The Arkansas Gazette installed a 6-unit Goss printing press capable of producing 37,000 48-page copies an hour. The old lady also received an Associated Press wire photo machine so she could print photos received over the telegraph. But the future of the Arkansas Gazette, like that of the rest of the world, would be forever altered on one fateful day.
It was December 7th, 1941. And I can remember it like it was yesterday. We heard it on the car radio. And when we saw it in the Arkansas Gazette, we knew it was real. Bernice Marsh Holder, October 6th, 1999.
By the start of World War II, even though we're getting the first competition from radio, newspapers are still the major source for information. And the Arkansas Gazette was ready for the war. They had put in new equipment, had a new press, and most of all, they had the capacity to print wartime pictures that came over the wire. But starting with the peacetime draft in 1940, all the newspapers in the country began to suffer from staff shortages, and women filled many places once held by men. During the war, there were major shortages in newsprint as well, cutting back on newspapers and their ability to deliver the news. But the biggest part of the impact on the Arkansas Gazette was the loss of J.N. High School's son, Carrick.
On December 4th, 1943, the Old Lady's Saturday edition reported tragic personal news.
Messages received here yesterday told of the death of Lieutenant Carrick White High School, pilot of an Army transport plane flying between India and China. No details were given.
In the same edition,
what is there to say? He was our good comrade in the confraternity of work and interest that makes the newspaper's staff a kind of family. In the few short years since he joined us to begin the career which war cut short, he had won our warm liking by his human qualities, his unfailing sense of fun, his modesty, and his ready friendliness. The elder among us had observed with keen interest his progress in mastery of our craft, and had formed high hopes for his future. We all felt a thrill of pride when he joined the Air Force. We all followed him in our thoughts through each stage of arduous training and shared his triumph when the silver wings were won. Since he went overseas to the perilous service assigned to him in the Far East, we have waited eagerly for every bit of news that came back. And now has come this news. Words are made futile. To say that all our hearts are heavy with grief is but a feeble expression of how we feel. Yet what else is there that can be said? This is good night, Carrick. Good night for the last time from your comrades in the city room. And may God rest the soul of a gallant gentleman.
My grandfather had this son, Carrick High School, after whom I am named, and he was the heir apparent to the Gazette. He would be the one who was groomed to take over. And so when he was lost in the war, it was a very jarring thing for the family.
I have suffered the greatest loss that could have befallen me, but I must do my best to carry on as I know Carrick would want me to do. My boy held my hopes for the future, and he will always be my strength and inspiration. J.N. High School.
that left a gap. My Aunt Elizabeth would have been able to fill it, I suppose, but that wasn't to happen under my grandfather. So the only male in the family at that time with anything like the proper background was my father, who had married my mother during World War II. He had been in the graphic arts industry. He was he sold printing, basically. Then in World War II, he'd gotten a lot of management experience, and so he was brought onto the newspaper, and as a manager, he found some things he didn't like, so he had to fight some battles. But as I say, he hadn't been a newspaper person, and I think he may have felt a little like an outsider in some respect. I know what it was like to be a publisher's son. I suppose to be an editor's son-in-law or the boss's son-in-law was perhaps even worse. So he had a hard row to hoe.
Harry Ashmore, the final piece of the puzzle that would guide the Gazette through her most trying times, was added in 1947.
Mr. Heiskell needed a new editor, someone to run the editorial pages, a page as it was then, and take over the management of the newsroom. Wanted an executive editor for the first time. And he was at some sort of newspaper meeting in the East and heard Harry make a speech. And Harry always was eloquent. And so the old man was impressed with him and made him an offer and got him out there. And Harry had been looking for a place to, he had been at one of the papers in South Carolina. And he wanted a place where he thought he could make a difference, because he saw the coming of the race issue as the big, overwhelming national issue for the next several years. And he thought he had been trained, he had been educated in a way that he thought he could make a contribution if he was at the right newspaper. And he knew something of the history of the Arkansas Gazette. So it was a good fit.
In Arkansas's gubernatorial race in 1954, Francis Cherry was challenged in the primary by a relative newcomer by the name of Orville Faubus.
One assignment, Bill Shelton summoned me to the city desk, and he had these clippings. He always kept his clippings. He was his own librarian. And he said, I want you to go down to the hotel, I think it was the Marion, and there's going to be a news conference there, and this man is going to announce for governor. His name is Orville Faubus.
Cherry made a number of politically unpopular mistakes, with the result that on the last day to file, Orville Faubus, from out of the hills of Madison County, came down to Little Rock, plunked down his filing fee, and announced for governor. It was a nip and tuck race until Cherry and his advisors claimed that Orville Faubus was a commie.
Commonwealth College was a left-wing institution outside of Mena, Arkansas, back in the early part of the 20th century. Orville ended up going there for a period of time.
The Gazette, they had some hesitancy in going all out for Faubus. But when Francis Cherry mentioned Commonwealth College, oh, it got Ashmore in a tizzy. He just had to come to the rescue then. And the truth is, he wrote Faubus's speech in answer to Cherry's charge of the communist taint that he put on the Commonwealth College issue.
Ashmore saw it as an egregious case of red baiting and unfair tactics to bring up something 20, 30 years in the past. Lord knows Orville Faubus was anything but a communist by 1954. So Harry came to his defense and he and Henry Woods and Edwin Dunaway got together and wrote a speech. Harry he was the wordsmith, so he did the writing. And they drafted a speech for Faubus to give. And that speech was credited with turning the race around in Faubus's favor and causing a backlash against Governor Cherry. And Faubus ended up winning that election and he became governor.
Of course, the irony in all of this is that by putting Orville Faubus in the governor's office, Ashmore inadvertently had created the person who was going to symbolize opposition to progress and desegregation in Arkansas and become his biggest political enemy.
Governor Faubus was re-elected in 1956 and was up for a third term in 1958. No Arkansas governor since Jeff Davis had ever been elected to a third term. But Faubus tapped into the issue that would cement his status as the most powerful Arkansan of the era.
On Tuesday, some 15 Negro children will be enrolled at Little Rock Central High School, along with more than 2,000 whites. There are those who have suggested that this cannot be done without inciting the populace of this city to violence. They have, we believe, too little faith in the respect of our people for law and order. Arkansas Gazette editorial, A Time of Testing, September 1st, 1957.
In 1957, integration was proceeding in Arkansas. It had happened first in Charleston, in the western part of the state. It had happened in Fayetteville. It had happened in Hoxie. So why can't it happen peacefully in Little Rock?
Word had got around to Harry and some of the others that Governor Faubus was probably going to make a move to stop integration. They didn't know what he would do, but they knew something was afoot. Harry asked to meet with Mr. Heiskell and Hugh Patterson downtown at the Gazette office, in Mr. Heiskell's office. And I should say that by this time, Harry and Hugh had become great friends. They took the lead, making sure that the Gazette's editorial position was the right one. Law and order, no mobs in the street, obey the court orders, which at the time amounted to being the pro-integration stand. And he and Harry worked at it together. The three of them gathered for this meeting in Mr. Heiskell's office on the Sunday before school started on Tuesday. And as it turned out, before Governor Faubus called out the National Guard the next night to surround Central High School, to prepare for how we're going to treat this. What are we going to do? And as Harry recounted it to me, he said to Mr. Heiskell, I know in my own mind what would be the right course for the paper to take, the stand that we should take, the editorial position. But it's not my paper. You stand to lose a lot of money. This is going to be an unpopular position if we do this. It's not my decision to make. And Hugh was backing him up, and he knew exactly what stand Harry was talking about. And as Harry told it, the old man listened patiently and heard him out, and then he had a swivel chair and he turned the chair so that he could look out his window down Louisiana Street. And when he turned back around, he said, I'm not going to let those people take over my town. And that was the answer that Harry and Hugh wanted. And that set the stage.
Little Rock arose yesterday to gaze upon the incredible spectacle of an empty high school surrounded by National Guard troops called out by Governor Faubus to protect life and property against a mob that never materialized. Dozens of local reporters and national correspondents worked through the day yesterday without verifying the few facts the governor offered to explain why his appraisal was so different from that of local officials, who have asked for no such action.
Faubus had to survive politically, and he believed the only way to do this somehow was to stop integration from happening.
He needed some turmoil. I'm convinced that he was playing the gallery. What is the most opportune thing that can come out of this? Well, I knew him for the political opportunist that he was. I never doubted that.
Now it remains for Mr. Faubus to decide whether he intends to pose what could be the most serious constitutional question to face the national government since the Civil War. Thus, the issue is no longer segregation versus integration. The question has now become the supremacy of the government of the United States in all matters of law. And clearly the federal government cannot let this issue remain unresolved, no matter what the cost to this community. Until last Thursday, the matter of gradual limited integration in the Little Rock schools was a local problem which had been well and wisely handled by responsible local officials who have had, and we believe still have, the support of a majority of the people of this city. On that day, Mr. Faubus appeared in Chancery Court on behalf of a small but militant minority and chose to make it a state problem. On Monday night, he called out the National Guard and made it a national problem. It is one he must now live with, and the rest of us must suffer under. If Mr. Faubus, in fact, has no intention of defying federal authority, now is the time for him to call a halt to the resistance which is preventing the carrying out of a duly entered court order. And certainly he should do so before his own actions become the cause of the violence he professes to fear. Arkansas Gazette editorial, The Crisis Mr. Faubus Made, September 4th, 1957.
As the eyes of the nation and the world turned upon Little Rock, the Gazette newsroom excelled under the intense pressure.
Oh my, the newsroom was just, I've never seen a newsroom more alive than it was that fall. That's the kind of atmosphere that generates exceptional reporting because everybody is operating at 100% capacity all the time. All of us, even those who had nothing to do with the running story, were caught up in the excitement and the tension. It was not a pleasant time.
As tensions at Central High School rose, Arkansas Gazette reporter Jerry Dono witnessed and became part of an iconic scene as Elizabeth Eckford attempted to enter the school.
That was a bothersome thing. She was coming east up to the school, I believe, as I recall. And when she got to the corner of 14th and Park, like she wanted to go into the school, the guardsmen closed ranks and wouldn't allow her to pass through to go into the school. And so then she'd walk a little farther along and try it again. They did it again. And so this happened several times. So then she just walked down the street south, and it was about halfway or maybe 3/4 where a girl who was apparently a student, white girl, started screaming at her in epithets of all kinds, and these guys who were, well, they were anti-integrationists. I don't know other way to put it, but they started egging her on too and following down the street. Well, I tried to stay just a little bit away from them, where I could still see what was going on and hear what was being said. So she kept going down. When she got down to 16th, seemed like she tried to get in again and couldn't. So she just crossed the street over to a bus bench at 16th and Park. And she sat down, and they were giving her a hard time. They were waiting for the bus, and it was not a pretty thing. And this lady came over, middle-aged lady and white woman, and sat down by her to comfort her, it looked like. It kept going on, and seemed to be very angry, like they'd like to get a hold of her. So I guess I lost objectivity, and maybe the only time I ever did, I think, as a reporter, but and 3 or 4 others too. Got behind the bench to form a kind of a protective shield between her and these thugs.
The drama on the streets caught international attention, and the Gazette would shine internationally, but pay a big price at home.
A huge number of white people all over the state turned against the Arkansas Gazette because of the editorial stand that was so eloquently laid out by Harry Ashmore.
And during this 2 weeks from the editorial, The Crisis Mr. Faubus made, within 2 weeks our circulation was down 20,000. It just only in August, thanks to a sort of contest, that we had got our circulation over into 6 figures, but immediately it was gone down to 80,000. And of course the switchboard jammed, people trying to cancel their subscription.
I remember hearing the figure, a dollar loss of $2 million, and I found that that spoke volumes for J.N. High School and the owners, and Hugh Patterson and so on, Louise Patterson, to be willing to accept that kind of monetary loss for basically a principle.
Who will build Arkansas if her own people do not? The flood-lighted billboard legend stood out in Gazette chief photographer Larry Obsitnik's dramatic night shot of federal troops moving across the Broadway Bridge toward Central High School. There were no state or community builders in the crowd that had provoked this humiliation for the law-abiding majority of Little Rock citizens. Among the adults in the mob that had thronged around the high school for a number of days, there were no leaders of the established business community, no philanthropists or sustained supporters of worthy civic causes. Many of the crowd, by no means all of them from out of town, were forced to ask directions to the school, a circumstance which gave some indication of their prior interest in educational matters. These were not builders, but wreckers. Arkansas Gazette editorial, Who Will Build Arkansas? September 26, 1957.
The Gazette was a voice of reason. And I've always thought that the independent newspapers of our state, especially during that time and even before, and I think that the independent little newspapers, the small weeklies and dailies out there, I think that those little newspapers made us different. They were progressive, and they had the courage to speak out many, many times. And they spoke out when they had to and when they needed to. But the thing that gave them the courage, I think, or what gave them courage, I think, was knowing that they were in the wake of the mothership. And the mothership was the Gazette.
In May 1958, the Arkansas Gazette received the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service. Harry Ashmore won the Pulitzer Prize for Distinguished Editorial Writing. This marked the first time in history that one newspaper won 2 Pulitzer Prizes in the same year. In October, the Gazette also won the Freedom Award.
Every newspaper must come to judgment and accounting for the course that forms its image and its character. If it is to be more than a mechanical recorder of news, If it is to be a moral and intellectual institution rather than an industry or a property, it must fulfill the measure of its obligation, even though, in the words of St. Paul, it has to endure affliction. It must have a creed and a mission. It must have dedication. It must fight the good fight. Above all else, it must keep the faith. J.N. High School, Freedom House Dinner, New York, October 14, 19.
After the resolution of the Central High crisis, the Old Gray Lady continued to shine as one of the great newspapers of the country. Many of her reporters and editors moved on to other publications, but she was able to recruit new talent from a national pool.
The Gazette had a great reputation, and the Gazette's reputation was not built entirely on the great school crisis and the developments there. It had also been known for a long time as a newspaper with high standards of literacy, and Mr. Haskell's was very protective of the English language.
I think the Gazette was kind of unusual in the South. It was a very literary journal and had that reputation, and so people were eager to work at the Arkansas Gazette, and so that newspapers, New York Times, New York Herald Tribune, Chicago, Philadelphia, all the great papers of the land were eager to get people from the Gazette.
Just a few blocks away from the Gazette building, the Arkansas Democrat saw great benefits because of the Gazette's stance on the desegregation crisis. Those benefits, however, would be fleeting.
When I went to work at the Gazette in 1960, the Democrat had the better circulation. The Gazette had much higher circulation before the 1957 crisis. But as a result of the Gazette stand in 1957 and 58, the Gazette lost, I think, perhaps a fifth of its circulation, which was quite dramatic, and along with the revenues from advertising and circulation. So the Democrats surged ahead, but never very far. And so, but after that, as the crisis faded and people began to forget, the Gazette circulation began to grow again. And sometime in the early 1960s, it surpassed the Democrat and then moved far, far on ahead.
The Gazette began a recovery, an economic and general recovery, and of course, in the 1970s, it once again was dominant in the field, more so than ever.
On November 2nd, 1972, the old man of the Gazette, J.N. Heiskell, still working with the title of editor, celebrated his 100th birthday.
Of course, it was a big occasion. That was 1972. At that point, the Gazette was simply the dominant newspaper in Arkansas. Everything had worked out well, and so his family pitched a centennial birthday party for him at the Little Rock Country Club, and everybody. I like to think that everybody who was anybody in Arkansas was there. Mr. Haskell, of course, was not all that strong at the time, although he seemed to be doing very well. And he sat, and the parade of people came by and wished him well. And as I have said, the next morning he was suggesting that I might prepare his obituary if he should die on the Democrats' time.
Just 8 weeks after his 100th birthday, John Netherland Heiskell, editor of the Arkansas Gazette, died at 12:15 p.m.
You've been involved in the paper, as any good paper will be, involved in a lot of controversy. Did it ever get to the point that what did you draw upon? Any personal philosophy that gave you the strength to continue what sometimes was an unpopular stand?
Well, it's just it was an editor's conscience. He knows when he's doing the right thing in a journalistic way and when he isn't. And it simply depends on his moral and journalistic character.
The purchase of the Arkansas Democrat by the Palmer newspapers is an important step for our company, the Little Rock community, and the state of Arkansas. Our opportunity to serve the Little Rock community is a dream come true. Our experience and resources will stand us in good stead in making the Democrat again a strong, independent newspaper in the Little Rock Evening Field. Qualifications aside, our objectives cannot be achieved without the aggressive support of Little Rock leadership and the entire public. The alternative to such success is monopoly. No one wants that. By working together, it won't happen. Arkansas Democrat editorial, New Democrat ownership, March 4th, 1974.
But the Democrat was an afternoon paper, and going to all kinds of problems with distribution and what have you. Afternoon papers in the United States were failing, and they were failing every year. Large metropolitan afternoon papers were collapsing, and the Democrat was really struggling, losing money, and that's when Walter Hussman bought the paper.
In 1974, the Arkansas-based Palmer Newspaper Group bought the struggling Arkansas Democrat. Walter E. Hussman Jr., 27, was named publisher.
We thought that probably if we could turn the business around and gain readers, gain some advertisers, gain some circulation, we could get it back into the black. And slowly over time, if we could increase our circulation enough, we could hopefully become a viable competitor to the Gazette.
I didn't know a lot about the Waco Media or the Hussman newspapers, but I knew they had plenty of money. They owned a group of monopoly newspapers in South Arkansas. They owned profitable cable television ventures. They had wealth from other sources. So number one, they could be competition. They gave evidence from early on that they were going to be at it for a while. And I thought there was at the Gazette, on the part of some people, an unhealthy inclination to dismiss the challenge, to not take them seriously.
It was like we had been going so good so long, it was like we were just kind of on automatic pilot waiting for the Democrat to throw in the towel. And when they went the other way, we had a real tough time getting off automatic pilot.
Hussman immediately began to address the challenge of making the Arkansas Democrat competitive with the Gazette.
We made a lot of changes in the way the newspaper was written and edited. We did emphasize more local news. We did start using color. But I found that there was a very receptive audience for people wanting a more reinvigorated, interesting Arkansas Democrat. Maybe they didn't agree with the Gazette's editorial philosophy. Maybe they were reflecting that also. So we had a very good reception from advertisers initially.
Within the first year, the Arkansas Democrat was making positive gains. Hussman was able to reverse the circulation losses. But competing with the Gazette as an afternoon newspaper proved to be too much.
We were feeling good about the way our internal cost structure was going, but meanwhile, our circulation started going back down again, and our advertising was stagnating, and we weren't really gaining any revenues, and the Gazette was gaining circulation, and they were gaining revenues.
In 1977, a self-imposed deadline to make the Democrat profitable was up. Hussman looked for a way out.
3 years has run out, and we are still not making any money. We're still losing money. We're starting to lose a lot less money than we did that first year when we were getting all this additional advertising and circulation, but we were still losing money. And so my father and I sat down and said, well, here we are. And my dad said, it was a valiant try, it's a good try, but we're still losing money and we need to recognize that. So at that point, the decision was made to kind of throw in the towel and go to the Gazette and see if we could do a joint operating agreement.
Well, the papers would semi-retain independent ownership, but they would group together in terms of production and so forth to save money. Hussman proposed an operation like that, a joint operating agreement, as it was called, to my father. Well, in most of the cities where this had happened and had any history at all behind it, it turned out that despite saving money by doing this, that the afternoon paper still was not viable in terms of a product just because people didn't want it anymore. And it became a financial drain on the operation as a whole. And my father didn't think that that was fiscally responsible to do that. So he told Hussman no.
They basically said, you know, we don't really see that we could be interested in that. So I got all the, there were 20 some odd of these joint operating agreements. I got a copy of all of them from the Justice Department. They're a matter of public record. I read them. And so I crafted the most favorable one in the United States for the Gazette. They were going to end up with 90-something% of the profits, and we were going to end up with less than 10%, which was the most generous or most favorable JOA in existence. They said no. And I think the reason they said no, I mean, you can ask them, but I think they thought we were going to go out of business. If we'd gone out of business, certainly that was a better deal for them than if they had to share even 5 or 10% of the profits with us. And they were pretty close to being accurate. It was conceivable to them and very plausible that we weren't going to be able to sell the newspaper to anyone else. In fact, when it was sold in 1974, we were about the only person that would buy it. So we were actually kind of exploring what do we do to shut down the newspaper. Well, what happened is we said, you know, when you come to grips with, you know, total failure like that, you really start thinking. You start thinking, is there anything we could possibly do? And you know, you start thinking, well, maybe we ought to really consider doing some things we've never even considered before, because what's the downside? If you fail doing that, well, you're going to fail if you don't do that. You know, absolutely, if you're thinking about shutting the newspaper.
Hussman sought out and visited other newspapers that had successfully competed under similar circumstances. From what he learned, he put together a plan that would take the Democrat into a full-on newspaper war with the Gazette.
So we went to Chattanooga and we sat down and we talked to him, visited with him a great deal. We went to Dallas and talked to the Dallas Times-Herald. We went to Winnipeg, Canada, and where they were offering free want ads. And we went all over the rest of the country and I found out, how did you do it?
The Arkansas Democrat added free want ads and more news to the paper. And they switched from an afternoon to a morning publication. But the most controversial tactic employed by Hussman would eventually land him in court.
We looked at the larger advertisers in town that was running almost all their business in the Gazette and very little advertising with us. And you know, the Dillards and the Sears and the Wards and the Pennies and people like that, and we thought we need their advertising. So let's price that advertising so low that it does cover our newsprint and ink cost. Then the rates would be low enough that it would be like there was a JOA here. For example, in Tulsa, they might charge $7 to advertise in one paper or $8 to advertise in both papers. There was a JOA in Tulsa. And we thought, well, that's what we'll do. The Gazette's rates are maybe $8 an inch. We'll set our rates at $1 an inch.
The other major change Hussman employed was hiring a new editor, John Robert Starr.
We came up with this plan, and I remember I first sat down with Bob McCord, to my recollection, and I said, you know, here's the plan. Here's what we're going to do. And I think he thought it was kind of crazy too. But he said, you know, if you're going to do this, I'm probably not the right person to do it. And so I said, gee, Bob, you've been around here. We've been getting the heck kicked out of us for years and not doing that well. Here's a chance we've got to really do well. That isn't a good time to quit. I think I tried to convince him to do it. But anyway, I said, well, be thinking about who might be a good candidate for this, you know. And as I remember, he came back and said, you know, I've got somebody to recommend to you, but he may be the right person, may not be. And he told me Bob Starr.
No. Here's the way that happened.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, when I told him that I was going to leave, which he didn't really want me to leave, and I really didn't want to leave either, except I knew I didn't want to be there when the end would come. And he said, well, then if you owe me to find somebody to take your place. And I said, well, that's only fair. And so I got the names of two very fine young men. They had been born in Arkansas, and they left. And so they were just ideal. And so Walter had a private airplane, and he went to see both of them and introduced them and had a good meeting with them. But he just didn't think that was a thing, and so he kept asking about Bob.
The bombastic Bob Starr. One of the finest newsmen I've ever known.
John or Bob, I guess he was probably a really good newspaper man, and I never liked him very well.
But I credit John Robert Starr with saving that paper. He was an SOB in many ways, but he did what had to be done to save that paper.
And he was tough, you know, and he worked hard.
He was just a phony, and I didn't like him, and I knew I couldn't work with him.
I thought Starr was what a lot of people at the Gazette thought in reflecting his column. That's what I'm thinking of now, his column. Was unnecessarily personal.
You know, it was not hard to dislike Bob Starr. I think he liked being disliked. And some of the stuff he wrote, I mean, he wrote columns making fun of Carrick Patterson's weight. I mean, that's how bad it got. I mean, he could be about as classless as they come, but very effective.
With all the elements in place, the newspaper war was on. And in 1984, the Arkansas Democrat posted a profit for the year.
Walter had said that if the first month he made a profit, he would divide that profit among the employees. And I'll be darned, he made the profit, and we got, I can't remember how much I got.
We took it, we had 300 and something employees, and I sat down at my desk and I divided 300 into 14,000, and it was, I can't remember how much it was, $42 a person, something. We just gave it all back to the employees, you know. I mean, at that point, $14,000, you know, wasn't going to make or break us from what we had lost, but the people who had hung in there with us all those really tough years, you know, it was just a really way to say thank you, you know, and gosh, it ended up being one of the best things we ever did. I remember later the Gazette tried to come and hire a single copy circulation manager, and they offered him a huge increase in salary and everything, and he turned them down. And I asked him later, I said, why'd you turn them down? He said, you remember that $41.27 you gave me that time out of the first profit you ever made? He said, you know, I decided I was going to stick with you.
But anyway, what in the spring, it seems like, of that year, we made this profit and we got these checks, and within a month or 6 weeks, the Gazette had sued us, and that was the end of the profits. No more profits.
Well, there was a staff meeting in which Hugh Patterson, the publisher of the Gazette, announced that he was going to file an antitrust suit against Walter Hussman. By any fair reading of antitrust law at the time, it made perfect sense. Walter Hussman was giving away classified advertising. He was giving away valuable retail advertising for $1 an inch to people like Dillard's. He had made a vow that he was going to run more pages in the Arkansas Gazette no matter how much it cost. They were going to run more. It would be as if you ran a service station and a guy with huge wealth came in across the street and said, I'm going to sell my gas for a nickel a gallon less than you do for as long as it takes to run you out of business. And so Hugh Patterson's family owned the Gazette and had no other real source of revenue to finance a campaign against a richer foe. So it filed an antitrust lawsuit. They lost.
My father made a huge error. And I think even he, while he was alive, admitted this. He hired lawyers from Houston who had been experts in this kind of thing. Arkansas is a parochial state. We don't like outsiders coming in and telling us what to do. And we especially don't like Texans coming in. These are pretty competent lawyers and everything, but they were fish out of water when that trial began. This guy, the lawyer from Houston, opened his mouth, spoke for about 2 minutes, and I said, "We have lost this suit." Then Philip Anderson, the Gazette, the Democrats' attorney, who's probably much more aristocratic and non-typically Arkansan than these guys from Houston were, but still did this folksy stuff. And basically, this jury of Arkansans believed the Democrats' story, that it was okay for Walter Hussman to spend his money any darn way he wanted to, even if it was an unfair business practice. The facts were never in dispute. Indeed, yeah, they admit, yeah, we did this free circulation, we did the free classifieds, we did the $1-an-inch advertising. We did all that, yeah. But it's okay because it's Mr. Hussman's money to do with what he wants. The jury bought that.
We were very surprised when the lawsuit was filed. They were still mucking money, and in fact, if you go back and look at the records from the lawsuit, I think it was in '83, December of '83, they'd had a great year, and they gave Hugh Patterson a $100,000 bonus, $125,000, some very large bonus.
I send it downstream.
I think, in retrospect, that they felt like the lawsuit was maybe an effort to win back in the courtroom what they lost in the marketplace.
Gazette lost the suit. Well, then what are you going to do? Because by this time, these tactics had been working. You know, it worked great. It cost him millions and millions and millions of dollars, but it worked great. Gazette was suffering. More and more, you know, people were wanting quality press work. They were wanting color and whatnot. The Gazette was faced with having to modernize its press. It cost them millions and millions of dollars. So if you couldn't raise advertising revenues, either by rates or by volume or both, to compensate, what were you going to do? The Gazette found itself in that situation. So very reluctantly, the alternative being going out of business. And we had more than 300 employees who would have been out on the street. It was decided to try to find a buyer. Well, the Gannett Company, as their chief guy, Al Newharth, got older, he had sought legitimacy more and more, and Newharth came and said, you know, we'd like to buy the Gazette because we're trying to establish this almost separate division of quality newspapers, and we promise we'll keep up the quality. And of course, we've got the financial clout and the business expertise that it'd take to keep this newspaper going and keep your employees employed and keep this tradition alive. Well, nobody wanted to sell to Gannett, but it was that or shut the doors. So the decision was made to sell to Gannett.
It is our hope and our expectation that we will preserve all of the best of that, and that we will add to the rest of that with an infusion of Gannett resources in terms of people, talent, and other resources.
I thought, this is a disaster. Yeah, for me. You know, I thought, you know, Gannett obviously is not going to come in here and buy the newspaper with the idea of maintaining two newspapers. So on a $60 million investment, there was really the only reasonable rate of return for them was to be the only newspaper in the market. So we decided, you know, the game is totally changed. We've got to realize that, and we've got to react. And so what do we do? Well, it was pretty bleak. What do we do? You know, because we started thinking about all the advantages we have. We have Arkansas's largest newspaper. We put out more pages. Well, Gannett can change that tomorrow. They can put out more news pages than we have. Well, we got free want ads. Well, Gazette can do free want ads, you know. you know, we kept thinking of the advantages we had, and we started thinking, you know, they can just about match every advantage we've got. And we thought, well, certainly there's some advantage we've got, and the only advantage we thought is, well, we're locally owned. Well, that was cold comfort, because, you know, in most surveys you do, people really don't care whether you're locally owned or not. They just want the best newspaper. You know, but since it was the only advantage we have, we decided we really had to promote it, and we did. We changed to Arkansas's largest newspaper. We just took largest out of that, and we became Arkansas's newspaper, and we were owned by Arkansans, managed by Arkansans, you know, et cetera, and we really promoted that, and that resonated with people in Arkansas, especially when Gannett really started changing the Arkansas Gazette.
With Gannett's arrival in Little Rock on Halloween of 1986, the staff of the Old Gray Lady had reason to believe they were in for a treat. But there were early signs of a trick in the air.
Newharth got in a limousine at the Capitol Hotel so that he could arrive at the Gazette in a limousine. And for those of you who don't know, the Capitol Hotel is 1 block from the Arkansas Gazette. But he took a limo ride to cover the distance.
Then, when Newharth came in and made a speech to all of us assembled in the city room and said, "We have very deep pockets," that bothered me no end. We're thinking about that money, and we got more than anybody, and we're going to spend it. Something went out of it then for me.
And I had great hopes that they would come in and clean up the business operation and do some aggressive selling of advertising and everything would be cool. Well, they were freaking idiots, as it turned out.
They ruined everything, I think, and they brought in such bad people.
Well, the men that they hired, I thought was pretty stupid.
Seemed to want to commit suicide there.
I don't know what it was.
I always said that I thought the Gannett's motto was, "If it ain't broke, break it."
One of the many missteps the Gannett Corporation would make in Arkansas involved Dillard's department store.
I remember clearly sitting at the city desk and somebody from advertising running through the newsroom saying, "We don't have the Dillard's ad yet. We don't have the Dillard's ad yet." Well, there would never be another Dillard's ad in the Arkansas Gazette.
And the worst mistake was violating my father's rule that you never mess with the integrity of the rate card, that your published rates are the same for everyone. You buy 100,000 inches of ads, you get one rate. If you buy 1 inch of ads, you get another rate. It's the same for everyone, no matter who you are, no matter what you are.
Gannett offered lower advertising rates to smaller advertisers. Walter responded by saying he would try to match the rates if the advertiser could offer proof.
What's proof? Well, proof is an invoice. All of a sudden, we're getting in lots of invoices, tons of invoices, because they're doing this with a lot of our advertisers. The Dillards got mad at the Gazette over a news story, and then they pulled out of the newspaper. We realized that they would stay out of the Gazette, and then they go back in the Gazette. That's typically what as soon as they cool down and they aren't as mad anymore, they typically go back because it's in their economic best interest to advertise. So we realized, well, they'll go back to the Gazette. We need to figure out some way to keep them from going back to the Gazette. We're not going to offer them any special deal not to go back to the Gazette. I don't think that'd be the right thing to do, but we can show dealers how the Gazette has not been treating them fairly. And we can show them where they have very, very small advertisers that are getting a lower advertising rate than Dillard's, which is their largest advertiser. And I'd already told Mr. Dillard about the problem that we had, that we were suffering because they were going around offering these rates. And he called me and he said, "Can you prove to me what you were telling me, that they offer lower rates to some people than they offer to me?" This is after they dropped out of the paper. And I said, I can prove it to you. And he said, "Well, I want you to come down here and bring your proof and show it to me." So I said, "Yes, sir."
Losing the Dillard's account was a major blow to the Gannett Corporation's Little Rock operation. But another, more public loss was that of sports editor Orville Henry.
It was maybe 88 or 89, somewhere along in there, when our great sports editor left. Now, Orville Henry, I understand, had been perhaps more than anybody else, had been the Gazette's savior in 1957. We lost perhaps a fifth of our circulation, but it would clearly have been a lot more had it not been for Orville Henry, because there were tens of thousands of people in Arkansas who read the Gazette for Orville Henry, who was who told you what you had to know about the Razorbacks. The Gazette had hired some assistant sports editor. Well, they'd hired an outside sports editor and an assistant sports editor. And he thought Orville's stuff was too long and too wordy. And one day, they published Orville's column was the column he'd written the previous week, and they ran it again. And well, that was kind of the last straw for Orville.
That came about with a phone call from Jack Stevens. And Jack Stevens called and said, would you be interested in hiring Orville Henry? And I said, you know, does the sun rise in the east? So I went to see Orville Henry. You know, we sat down, and the first thing Orville Henry said is, I will go to work for you. The first words of his mouth, I will go to work for you. Let me tell you what I want, and if you'll agree to it, I'll go to work for you tomorrow.
And so he decided he'd do it. But he called me and told me about it. And but he said, I'm gonna do it unless the Gazette gives me a better deal. And shows an interest in me. I'm going to go to the Democrat next Monday. So I called Max Brantley at the Gazette and told him Orville Henry's going to leave because he's so furious at the way he's been treated. And Max said, we can't let that happen. And so he went the next morning and he tells Walker Lundy, Orville Henry's going to quit, going to go to the Democrat. And Walker says, well, so what? Do we care? And Max said, hell yes, we care. And persuaded him that would be a disaster for the Gazette if Orville Henry left. And so he tried to call Orville, but he called Orville on his Gazette line. He had not his personal line at his house. And that line was upstairs, and Orville wouldn't answer the phone. And Ann wouldn't answer, his wife Ann wouldn't answer the phone. And Lundy called 3 or 4 times over the weekend, got no answer, left a message, got no answer. And so Orville on Monday they had a press conference and announced he was going to the Democrat.
Gannett's management of the Old Gray Lady drew criticism from the readers of Arkansas, and Gannett was criticized internally by active staff members, as well as those who had moved on, but kept the Gazette close to their hearts.
I just talk a little about Gannett, and I have no problem with offending anybody living or dead at that newspaper company, because I think they are trash. They made every wrong move that a company can make, starting with their attitude, which seemed to be those hicks in Little Rock don't know how to run a newspaper. We'll go down there and show them how it's done. And boy, did they show us how it was done. You know, if there was an absurd contest to gain new subscribers, they would come up with it. If there was a new bad way to write a feature story, they knew how to do it. If there was another, if there was a way, you know, if there any possible way to degrade the value of the front page of a serious newspaper, Gannett knew how to do it. The pictures that they could choose to put above the fold of the front page that just cried out, this is no longer a serious newspaper. You can turn the pages. Fluff was substituted for content at every level of the paper. And the people they brought in from the Gannett chain that were by and large inept, incompetent. I mean, they knew how to put out a Gannett paper. They knew very well how to put out a Gannett paper, but they did not know how to put out a serious newspaper. And they never understood that the Arkansas Gazette was, first of all, a serious newspaper and had been since 1819. They had no sense of the history of the paper or of the place, knew nothing about Arkansas, and had no understanding of the resentment that they immediately caused among the readers of the paper, who understood full well what was happening to their beloved Arkansas Gazette. They never understood, up until the last day when they finally said, okay, Walter, you can have it. What did you give us to sell out? And Walter Husband and I, I was on the other side in that I was pulling for the Gazette during the whole newspaper war. But he won it. Yeah, he won it, and it's not Walter Husband that I still hold responsible for the way the Gazette died. It was that gang of thieves from the Gannett Company who never understood and never wanted to understand, never will understand what they did to that newspaper and to this state.
Assuming the widespread and undenied reports are true.
This is our last day, and I just got the word from Doug McCorkindale.
The Arkansas Gazette soon will bid farewell to a state it has known and praised and criticized and loved intensely for almost 172 years.
Give me your eyes, I'll show you things you never dreamed you thought you'd see.
It is not a pleasant thought, but this institution will take leave with its head high and its conscience clear.
It was a devastating day to me.
That was a grim day.
Bad day. It was a bad 2 or 3 months. It was a long time getting over it.
The Gazette, up until the last 2 years I was there, was family. I did everything. My whole life was shaped, centered around that newspaper.
As we left this place, just having been told that it had been sold, they had guards at every door, on every floor. They were changing the locks.
I thought this life would comfort me.
A cliche to say, thank goodness somebody wasn't here to see it. Thank goodness my grandfather wasn't here to see it.
We are indebted to those of you who have been with us through the decades. You are a part of this newspaper. We hope that you have felt that we were a part of you. Let us all cherish that memory. We will take our leave mindful of the words of St. Paul, who wrote, "I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith." We believe the Arkansas Gazette has kept the faith, and we are proud to have had the privilege for almost 2 centuries. Arkansas Gazette editorial, goodbye and thank you. October 18th, 1991.
Did the Arkansas Gazette die, or does it live on?
My father lives on in me and my grandchildren, but we all understand that the real father is in the grave over at Hot Springs, and his memory fades a little bit every year, and so will the Gazettes, and we have to get used to that.
The Gazette died in 1991. It is no more.
I don't think it did because, as I say, the name continues on.
The Gazette died on October the 18th, and it does not live on. And I think that needs to be fully understood. And I don't see much of the Arkansas Gazette reflected in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette.
Well, it still exists in the hearts and minds of a lot of people, but that's slowly disappearing, of course, because you can't keep people like me. At my age, I ain't got much longer. So when I'm gone, that'll be one more person who remembered the Gazette, and nobody to replace them, because it's a different story now.
To Mr. Husband, may we say this: you may have the presses, you may have the photo labs, The word processors are yours, but you will not and may not have the spirit of the Arkansas Gazette. That spirit belongs to the people of Arkansas, and we are taking it with us.
Well, I just got the phone call, and I guess you all know why we're here. This is our last day, and I just got the word from Doug McCorkindale.
Good evening, everybody. What many had thought was the inevitable happened today, and a piece of Arkansas tradition is gone.
We cannot let that name die, and we don't intend to.
Wrote a letter, I'll send it downstream. I hope the ink doesn't bleed too much. I hope that you get to read it love someday. I fold it up into a paper slip, send it off with a wave.
We've been poor for a long time, and we're about to get poor.
Firecracker and puts it in the paper sack, and he goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
If I could, I would make time go backwards. The river would run upstream, and everything I've lost would come back.
If these reports need a miracle here and more first thing in the morning, this could be the last in the Arkansas Gazette.
We, however, invite all former Gazette employees to apply as a Democrat for jobs.
A wake is not a sad event. If the deceased has lived a good life and a full life and a
Sunday afternoon, I take, there's a sweet sound the trees make when the wind blows.
And the good Lord willing, we'll just do the best we can.
Hey, long live the Gazette and the memory of the chief.
I'm gonna miss it. I can't stand this.
Privileged to be here with you this evening and to pay tribute to a great old lady.